Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pretentious Nerds. This is your expert consultant here, Chris Dickrsn, coming at you with a new idea, a new show, some fresh ideas. I just want to get out there and talk about video games, really. I play games all the time. Like I said in the previous video, I had completed 89 games at that time. It ended up being around 94. So, with playing so many games to their completion, finishing them, I want to talk about them. I want to get out there, not just put them in another counter. I want to be able to talk about the things I play because I have so many various opinions and feelings about these things. And like I said before, no game is terrible to me, except Naruto Connections. But aside from that, few games are just god-awful and miserable to just want to forget about them. So I want to talk about all these games, and if some are bad, explain why, and why I think so, and if some are good, explain why I love them. So, without further ado, our first episode of this little fun series is going to be about Monochrome Mobius, Rights and Wrongs Forgotten. A relatively underappreciated, I guess you can say, JRPG that came out around, I think it was October of last year, probably earlier, but regardless. It is a very traditional turn-based JRPG. As you can see in the gameplay, if you've played a JRPG before, this is probably the most basic kind of basic interpretation of one. The one really cool thing about this game that I have really never experienced with it is that it's a 20th anniversary celebration of the Udawar Ramono series, and that that name I just butchered is a PS Vita turn. Well, I'm sure before the Vita obviously being 20 years, but that's how I know it, and probably how most people know it in the West too. Was a visual novel / turn-based RPG that back in the day when the Vita was kind of like in its heyday for JRPG fans, was one of the mini games that kind of would grace its presence, and there was a good number of them. I don't know for sure, but there were quite a few Udawara games on the Vita, and I had never played them myself, but I had always seen them, and I was always like, oh, that's cool, like maybe I'll play it one day, and then of course I never did. But regardless, this is actually a prequel to that series, and obviously what you're watching now is not a turn-based not a tactics visual novel game. So, from my understanding, this is the team's first kind of step into a larger 3D, more traditional open world-esque exploration focus, I guess you could say, Japanese role-playing game. And definitely a step away from the tactics genre. And I don't know if it's the team's first time, but I think this is a really cool game, especially if you are a JRPG fan, and just really like the more old, I don't say old school, but like lower budget turn-based RPGs that are trying something that you don't always see every day, and they're a little weird, they're a little different, but that's what makes them so entertaining, is because you never know what to really expect out of these games, and that's why I really haven't been enjoying it so far. I've only put about 2 hours into it, and of course, with this video series, it's not always going to be like 2-hour impressions. It's going to be a variety of things, variety of time frames, but this is where I feel like a good point where I've played this game enough, I kind of got the vibe of what it's going for. I want to sit down and talk about it, and what I think is good and what I think is not so good. Thankfully, at this point, I think most of it's pretty good. It stars the story, going over a little bit, won't provide too much with spoilers, but basically, you have a brother and sister who set off on an adventure to find their father, and they both grew up separately from each other, and so it's kind of this, both of them have these really cool interactions where they have different interpretations of their father, and it's kind of seeing this come out ahead as they learn more about them, and as they grow together. I think it's a really solid beginning to a story, and I've seen reviews say both ways, that some like it, some don't, but I think as right now, it's a solid enough beginning to, get one interested to see where it's going to go. And since I have not had that much time to dig into the story, of course I can't really talk too much whether I think it's bad or good. I just think it's a good opening to it. If it is a tad bit slow, but hey, that's JRPGs for you, and if you're fine with that, like heck, my favorite game of all time is Persona 4, and the opening is like 4 hours long. So regardless, I think it's a pretty solid opening to the story. Moving on to the gameplay. So the gameplay, as you can see, is a very normal turn-based style. I would say the one interesting thing that has been introduced to me so far is if you look in the top left-hand corner of the game, there is a ring, and it's basically that's how the game determines once they make a 360 around the ring, it is their turn. And it's a little bit, it's one I really haven't seen much before. I think maybe Shadow Hearts might have done something with a similar style, or maybe that's just the QTE ring I'm remembering. Regardless, it's this nice way that you can actually jump in between layers of the ring, and as you get to the smaller side of the ring, and like deeper into it, your turn is actually quicker. So it's kind of if an enemy gets staggered and you hit that enemy while it's staggered, your turn becomes basically quicker because you're jumping inside the ring. And I think it's a really fun thing to play around with and kind of make battles feel a little bit more engaging when otherwise they may become a bit too samey and a bit too little, like, I've done this a billion times before in every other JRPG, especially when the game doesn't have, the visual excitement of a lot of more other popular JRPGs out there, such as Persona or even like a classic Final Fantasy, with the way the camera shifts. But moving on from the gameplay, it's the one thing that I really want to talk about, because everything else is very standard. It's very like, okay, you're gonna enjoy it, or you won't enjoy it based off about 5 minutes of looking at this game. The visuals is something that I find so interesting to me. They are, it feels, I should have looked up what engine this is, but it almost feels like maybe an Unreal Engine 4 type of deal. But you can clearly see the budget. Like, just obviously from the second you're watching it, you can see this game was obviously made on a more tighter budget than you would expect. But just really looking at it, I don't dislike it. I feel like the visuals have a certain style to them, though while they may look a little cheap at times, I think they're still charming to it. I think the character designs, forgive me, I should have looked up the character designer, are pretty solid, and they fit in the world in a very weird way, but at the same time, I think they fit well. It is definitely an interesting style that I have only ever seen before in a kickstarted JRPG called Edge of Eternity. And that visual style was very much like, pretty sure that one was Unreal Engine 4, but very much like, hey, we're a smallish dev team, we're fans of JRPGs, so we went ahead and made what we would think our style, and that was really like a Star Ocean kind of vibe that one gave me. But looking at this, I get that similar vibe, but almost more refined personally. I didn't hate Edge of Eternity, but I really wasn't a big fan of the gameplay, and the world did look very cheap. Even if it did at times look gorgeous, it felt like the mix between, it's the same problem that some Star Ocean games have. It's where it's like the characters don't really match the environment they're in, but the light cell shading in Monochrome Mobius is done well enough to where I think it's like, the characters do fit the overall style and through the limitations, which is something that I have to give the game and developers a lot of credit for, because it's not something that I think Star Ocean can really even manage to fix. Even with Star Ocean 6, The Divine Force, as solid as that game can be, it's still, I still have a problem with those character designs and the way they clash against the world and how the world is structured. So this is, looking at Monochrome Mobius, it's kind of what I wish is like that, the characters aren't fully cel-shaded, and they're slightly cel-shaded in that anime style, and the world is also slightly cel-shaded. So it makes it, what would traditionally feel like a very cheap and very ugly world, I think comes across as slightly more stylized and more easy on the eyes, if for lack of a better phrase. So overall, I think I've put about 2 hours in this game so far, and really have started like getting into the exploration side of things. And this is where I think the game more or less shines, and where I miss, it kind of comes across what I miss about classic JRPGs. Just a dedication to exploration, a dedication to like, hey, introducing this world and just kind of letting you run around it. And like, yes, it's been done. There's we have a lot of, you know, RPGs now that let you do this, but this is very, for the saying old school, I guess you could say, where you are put down in this world and you're opening chests, and you know the combat's turn-based. It's not like not a Star Ocean, not action-based combat. It's just that classical turn-based, and that's something that we don't see as much of. Like, yes, The Legend of Heroes still like carries the torch for 3D, you know, turn-based RPGs, when Persona is not obviously existing. So it's really nice to see this kind of represented in a way that we don't in a lot of days by games like this. And I would say, in a weird way that probably most don't know, but if you were a fan of the PS3 era of JRPGs, and yes, few people were a fan of that era, it is, you know, lauded as the worst JRPG era in history. But there are some little shines, like little bright spots in there of really weird stuff that was coming out around that time. And it really kind of gives me that vibe of a PS3 JRPG, but like a good one. I'm thinking of like Arno Surge. You know, obviously Arno Surge is like okay, but it's I feel like it's kind of what, if this game came out in the PS3 era, I probably would have been all over it. But unfortunately, since then, we have been blessed with a revitalization of JRPGs. But we are still lacking on the turn-based side. So giving this opportunity to kind of like, you know, give us a little hint of what a old school turn-based RPG would have, you know, might be or could have been if the genre kind of was still as popular as it was back in the day, in the PS2 days. We could have had something like this, you know. So in conclusion, Monochrome Mobius is a interesting video game, one that I don't know if I could see myself playing all the way through it. I don't know if I love it that much, but I feel maybe if you're really looking for a turn-based RPG and really just kind of miss that vibe, that old school vibe of PS2 days, I feel like this could be your game. And at the end of the day, I have a lot of praise for it. You know, really, I didn't think I played long enough to come out with and complain enough about it. I don't think there's problems with it. It's just if you're not into, you know, the really niche JRPGs, then it's not going to be your thing. But maybe it's a good gateway to the weird niche JRPGs. I think its difficulty is accessible enough to where it's like, hey, if you're looking to get into niche stuff, then this would be a great entryway point. So, and without further comment, Monochrome Mobius, cool game, and I think it deserves more attention than it's got. But hey, it has a 9 out of 10 Steam rating, and that seems to be a good place where it can find an audience and flourish there. I hope it does well. I hope it continues to do well there rating-wise, and I hope that maybe more people find it. Maybe with this video, maybe not. But that'll be all for the day. Thanks for joining me on this little journey. Hopefully we'll see more episodes like this. I play a lot of games, but of course it's early January, so we're kind of in a quiet zone, but we'll see where this series takes us. I'm always looking for new stuff. I'm always playing new stuff, and I'll hopefully make more videos on that. But yeah, thanks for joining me if you stayed this long, and yeah, video games.